That is how I met my wife. She was a waitress in a diner I'd never been to, and I was a man waiting for a blind date who was never going to show up. I left that diner with a fake fiancé. A year later, I left the church with a real one. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 34 years old, and I'm a building superintendent in a city that has mostly forgotten about quiet corners and patient hands. And this is the story of how I stopped being a ghost. Let me back up. Before that night, my life was a series of locks and keys. Not just the metal ones I carried on a heavy, clanking ring at my hip. I'm talking about the other kind. The ones inside. I was the super for the Chamberlain, a pre-war apartment building with good bones and 1,000 tiny problems. A dripping faucet in 3B. A sticking window in 5A. A radiator that hissed like a cornered cat in the lobby. My days were a checklist of other people's minor emergencies. I was good at it. I was good at being quiet. I was good at finding the source of the problem. I was good at fixing what was broken without making a lot of noise about it. My father had been a mechanic, a man who could diagnose an engine by the quality of its silence. He taught me that most things and most people tell you what's wrong with them if you just listen long enough. So I listened. I listened to the hum of the boiler in the basement, the whisper of drafts under century-old doors, the weary sighs of my tenants as they handed me their keys. I lived in the basement apartment, a space that was more functional than comfortable. It was my workshop, my office, and the place I slept. It smelled of ozone and sawdust, and the faint, metallic scent of old pipes. I didn't mind. The solitude was a worn, familiar coat. I had a cot, a hot plate, and a wall of tools, each one hanging in its perfect, designated spot. Order. That was my anchor. If I could control the small universe of my workshop, maybe the larger, chaotic one outside wouldn't feel so overwhelming. I was switched off. That's the only way to describe it. Years before, a light inside me had been turned off, and I'd never bothered to find the switch to turn it back on. The source of the outage was a woman named Chloe. We had been together for 5 years. We had picked out a ring. We had talked about names for children we would never have. And then one Tuesday, over a dinner I had cooked, she told me it was over. There was no one else. That's what she said, and I believed her. It would have been easier if there had been a rival, a villain, a clear reason. No, her reason was much quieter and much more devastating. It's just this, she had said, gesturing vaguely at me, at our small apartment, at the life we had built. It's too quiet, Eli. You're too quiet. You're so steady, you're like a rock. But I don't want to live with a rock. I don't know, more noise, more drama, more something I didn't have in my inventory. I was the man who fixed things. I couldn't fix a person's need for chaos. I couldn't fix a person who found my calm unsettling. So I just nodded. I packed her things for her in boxes, labeled them neatly, and helped her carry them to her car. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just fixed the problem of her leaving. After she drove away, the silence she had complained about rushed in to fill the space she'd left behind. It was deafening, and in that silence, I made a quiet agreement with myself. I was the kind of man who doesn't get a family. I was the kind who stands on the sidelines. The fixer, the caretaker of the building, but not of a life. I accepted it. I hung it on a hook in my mind, next to my other unchangeable truths. The sky is blue. Gravity is real. Elias Vance is meant to be alone. This belief wasn't born with Chloe, only confirmed by her. My mother left when I was 7. She was a woman who hummed, who filled our small house with music and color. My father was like me, quiet, steady, a man of few words and capable hands. One day, the music just stopped. She was gone. My father never spoke of her again. We just continued. The silence in our house grew, and I learned to live in it. I learned that love was a fragile thing that could just walk out the door without a word. My father gave me only one real piece of advice, a principle that became the load-bearing wall of my entire moral code. He was working on an old, skittish mare someone had brought to him, a beautiful animal that had been mistreated. I watched him stand in the paddock with her for hours, not approaching, just being there. It started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle. He didn't move. He just stood there getting soaked. Why don't you just rope her? I asked, a boy of 12, impatient. He looked at me, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Son, he said, his voice low and calm, you don't break a horse's spirit to earn its trust. You just stand with it in the rain. Sooner or later, it learns you're not the storm. I never forgot that. It was how I approached my work. It was how I approached the world. Don't force it. Be patient. Stand in the rain. The problem was, I'd been standing alone in the rain for so long, I'd forgotten what the sun felt like. My sister, Clara, was the one who forced me into that diner. She lived 1,000 miles away, but she called every Sunday, her voice a bright, persistent bird against the window pane of my solitude. Eli, you're 34. You can't just live in a basement and fix pipes forever. It's a good basement, I'd say, and the pipes are very grateful. She didn't laugh. She'd set up a blind date. A friend of a friend. Her name was Sarah. She was an accountant. She's nice, Eli. Just go. Wear a clean shirt. Please. So I went. For Clara. I wore a blue button-down shirt that felt like a costume. I sat in a booth in a diner called the Blue Plate, a place with cracked vinyl seats and the comforting smell of coffee and fried onions. I checked my watch. 7 o'clock. Then 7:15. At 7:30, I knew. Sarah the accountant wasn't coming. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even disappointed. It was just a confirmation of the facts. This wasn't my world. I was just a tourist. I was about to signal for the check when a woman slid into the booth opposite me. The waitress. She had been my waitress. Her name tag said Lena. She had a smudge of what looked like chocolate on her cheek, and her hair was escaping a messy bun in tired little wisps. Her eyes, though, her eyes were wide and alert and filled with a kind of frantic energy that made the whole diner seem to stand still. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the tabletop. Her knuckles were white. I'm going to ask you something completely insane, she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. And I need you to just say yes. Please, don't think. Just say yes. A man whose entire life was built on thinking, on diagnosing, on considering every angle before acting. Okay, I heard myself say. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Relief washed over her face, so potent it was like watching a light turn on. My ex-boyfriend is at the counter. He won't leave me alone. He's a monster, but he looks like a prince, and everyone always believes the prince. I glanced over my shoulder. There he was, tall, handsome, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly salary. He was smiling at the owner, a picture of charm, a charming bully. I knew the type. She took a shaky breath. Can you be my fiancé? Just for 5 minutes? Just until he leaves? My brain did a quick diagnostic. This was not a leaking pipe. This was not a sticking door. This was a human problem, messy and unpredictable. My programming screamed, abort, retreat to the basement. But then I looked at her eyes again. I saw the exhaustion in them, the desperation, and beneath that, a flicker of something else. Defiance. She wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking for a tool, a shield, for 5 minutes. My father's voice echoed in my head. Stand with it in the rain. Okay, I said again, this time with more conviction. I'm your fiancé. The smile she gave me wasn't a happy one. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief, the kind you see on people pulled from wreckage. Thank you, she breathed. My name is Lena. Elias, I said. She slid her hand across the table, and I took it. Her hand was small and cool. Just then, the prince approached our booth. His smile was wide, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating chips of glass. Lena, honey, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I thought we could talk. You weren't answering my calls. Lena's grip on my hand tightened. Yulan, I'm Busse. I'm on a date. Julian's eyes flickered to me, dismissing me in a single glance. He saw my simple shirt, my work-roughened hands. I was nothing, a temporary obstacle. A date, he scoffed lightly. Come on, Lena. Stop this. Let's go outside. He reached for her arm. And that's when I did something I hadn't planned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I just shifted my hand, lacing my fingers through hers, and looked Julian directly in the eye. She said she's busy. I said, my voice quiet but firm. The same voice I used to tell a tenant their building-wide plumbing issue was under control. Calm. Certain. Her fiancé would appreciate it if you left her alone. The word fiancé hung in the air between us. Julian's mask of charm cracked. He stared at our joined hands, at the simple, unwavering look on my face. He was used to shouting matches, to drama, to tears. He wasn't prepared for quiet solidity. He searched for a weakness, a flicker of doubt, and found none. He sneered. Fiancé, you're kidding me. He's not, Lena said, her voice finding a strength from somewhere. Now please leave, Julian. You're making a scene. He held my gaze for a moment longer, then backed away, his retreat cloaked in a final dismissive glare. He walked out of the diner, the little bell over the door tinkling mockingly behind him. The air in the booth deflated. Lena pulled her hand back, tucking it into her lap like a frightened bird. Thank you, she whispered, not looking at me. I'm so sorry. You shouldn't have been involved in that. It's okay, I said. And the strange thing was for the first time in a very long time, I felt functional, useful for something other than a faulty switch. She finally looked at me, and I saw the full weight of her situation in her eyes. It was more than just an annoying ex. This was a deep, consuming fear. It's not just him being a jerk, she said, her voice barely audible. It's my brother, Daniel. Julian is trying to take him from me. And then she told me everything. Her parents had died 2 years ago, leaving her as the sole guardian for her younger brother, Daniel, who was now 18. Daniel had a severe nonverbal learning disability. He was brilliant with patterns and art, but the world was a terrifying, overstimulating place for him. He needed routine. He needed quiet. He needed her. Their parents had left a substantial trust for Daniel's care, a trust that Lena managed. Julian, her ex of 6 months, came from a wealthy, influential family. He had always seen Daniel as a burden, an inconvenience. Now, he was petitioning the court for conservatorship. He was painting Lena as an unstable, irresponsible guardian, a flaky waitress who couldn't provide a stable home. His family's lawyers were sharks, and they were systematically destroying her reputation. There's a party next weekend, she said, twisting a paper napkin into a shredded mess. For his grandmother. She's the matriarch of the family, the one everyone listens to. Julian's plan is to get me there, get me upset, and prove to his entire family that I'm unfit. He told me if I didn't show up, he'd take it as an admission of guilt. If I show up alone, he'll tear me apart. She looked up at me, her face pale. That's why I needed a fiancé. I just needed to show them I'm not alone, that I have a stable life. A partner. It was a stupid, desperate idea. The world saw a flaky waitress, a difficult woman, unstable. What I saw was a woman fighting a war on her own, using whatever makeshift weapon she could find. I saw a woman trying to protect someone vulnerable. I'll do it, I said. She blinked. What? I'll be your fiancé. For the party. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Why? You don't even know me. I thought about my quiet basement apartment, about the silence, about the long years of feeling nothing, about a man standing in the rain, waiting for a frightened horse to see he was in the storm. Everyone deserves someone to stand with them in the rain, I said. And that's how the invention began. We met 3 times that week for coffee. We had to build a life out of thin air, a history, a plausible love story. Okay, so how did we meet? She asked, chewing on the end of a pen. My building, I said, the idea coming to me suddenly. You were a friend of a tenant, Mrs. Gable in 4C. You were helping her with her groceries, and her lock was stuck. I came up to fix it. It felt real. It was the kind of thing that happened in my actual life. Okay, I like that, she said, a small, genuine smile appearing for the first time. And I was so impressed with your quiet competence that I asked you out for coffee. I was surprised. I added, playing along. I'm not used to people asking me out. That part wasn't an invention. And our first date, we went to the botanical gardens. We talked for hours. You told me about how every building has a soul, and I told you about, she trailed off. About what? I prompted gently. About Daniel, she said softly. I told you about his drawings. He draws birds. Only birds. He has hundreds of sketchbooks filled with them. Every feather perfect. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing. We started talking. I told her about my father and his gentle hands. She told me about her mother's garden. I told her about the secret history of the Chamberlain, the hidden dumbwaiter I'd found sealed behind a wall. She told me about the specific shade of blue Daniel used for blue jays, a color he mixed himself and couldn't find in any art store. I was learning the schematics of her life. The load-bearing walls, the hidden stresses, the quiet, beautiful rooms she kept locked away from the world. And I realized I hadn't felt this engaged, this switched on, in a decade. My own quiet rooms were starting to get some light in them. The day before the party, I went to her apartment to pick her up for our final rehearsal dinner, which was really just pizza at her place. Her building was on the other side of town, a small, clean walk-up. I was a few minutes early, and I saw them through the front window before they saw me. The curtains were open. The light inside was warm. Lena was sitting on the floor, and across from her was a young man with a focused, intense expression. Daniel. He had a large sketchbook open on his lap. Lena was sitting perfectly still, her profile turned to him. He was drawing her. Her hand was resting on a bowl of fruit, and she was holding a pose, a patient, serene statue. But her eyes weren't vacant. She was watching him. She was watching his hand move across the paper, a small, proud smile on her face. And in that one, quiet, unguarded moment, I saw it all. It wasn't a burden. It was a partnership. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a devotion. The world saw a sister saddled with a disabled brother. I saw a woman who was the calm, steady center of someone else's universe. I saw a love so fierce and protective it took my breath away. That was the moment it stopped being about helping a stranger. That was the moment I started to fall in love with my fake fiancée. When she opened the door, I must have had a strange look on my face. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Everything is perfect," I said, and I meant it. The party was exactly as I'd imagined. A sprawling house on a hill, filled with people whose clothes were meticulously casual and whose smiles were professionally bright. It was a foreign country. I felt like I had the wrong passport. Lena was a nervous wreck beside me. She wore a simple dark blue dress, and she looked like a wildflower in a room full of orchids. She was beautiful, but she was out of her element, and she knew it. I put my hand on the small of her back. "I'm here," I whispered. "Just breathe." Julian found us within minutes. He glided through the crowd, his grandmother, a formidable woman with diamonds at her throat, on his arm. "Grandmother," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk. "You remember Lena. And this is her friend, Elias." The grandmother's eyes swept over me, taking in my rented suit and my quiet demeanor. It was not a friendly inspection. "Elias is my fiancé," Lena said, her voice shaking only slightly. The grandmother raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Fiancé? Lena, dear, you are so full of surprises." The words were light, but they carried the weight of a judgment. Julian smiled his reptile smile. "Yes, isn't it wonderful? Elias is what is it you do again?" He asked it as if he were inquiring about a curious but unpleasant hobby. "I'm a building superintendent," I said, my voice even. I didn't offer any more. I didn't try to embellish it. It was the truth. "A handyman," Julian translated for his grandmother, a note of triumph in his voice. "Lena has found herself a handyman." How practical. He was trying to get a reaction. He wanted me to get angry, to get defensive. He wanted Lena to be embarrassed. He was setting a fire, hoping we would panic and run. But I just looked at him. I didn't break his gaze. I let the silence stretch. I had spent my entire life becoming an expert in silence. He was an amateur. Then I remember my father. You don't break the spirit. You just stand the rain. Julian wasn't the horse. Lena was. He was the storm. I turned my back on him. Completely. I turned to Lena, who was looking pale and cornered. I put my hands on her arms, forcing her to look at me, to see that Julian and his grandmother and this entire glittering, hostile room had ceased to exist. "You seem cold," I said softly, my voice for her alone. I saw a room with a fireplace when we came in. Let's go find it. I'll get you a drink. I didn't wait for an answer. I put my arm around her and gently guided her away, leaving Julian and his grandmother standing there in a pocket of stunned silence. I had refused to play his game. I had not fought the storm. I had simply led her out of the rain. We found a room with a fireplace. I got her a glass of water. We sat on a sofa in the corner, and for a long time, we just watched the flames. "How did you do that?" she finally asked. "You weren't scared of him at all." "He's just noise," I said. "You learn to filter it out when you work in a boiler room." Later in the evening, the grandmother, Mrs. DeWitt, approached us again. This time, she was alone. Julian was across the room, holding court, but his eyes kept darting toward us. The narrative was cracking. His intended victim was calm, and she was not alone. Mrs. DeWitt sat in the armchair across from us. Her gaze was just as sharp, but the mockery was gone. It had been replaced by a genuine curiosity. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice formal, "my grandson has expressed concerns about Lena's ability to care for her brother." "Understand," I said. "He believes he would be a more suitable guardian." "He's entitled to his opinion," I said calmly. She leaned forward slightly. "And what is your opinion? What, exactly, are your intentions toward this girl?" It was a test. She expected a grand declaration, a passionate defense. I looked at Lena. I saw the girl in the window, holding a pose for her brother. I saw the waitress fighting off a bully. I saw the woman who had walked into my life and turned on a light I thought was burned out forever. I turned back to Mrs. DeWitt. "Ma'am," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the relative hush of the room. "I've seen Lena with Daniel. I've seen her patience and her love. It's the kind of bedrock you could build a world on. As for my intentions, my only intention is to make sure Lena knows she never has to stand in the rain alone again." A flicker of something, understanding, respect, passed through the old woman's eyes. She had expected a performance. I had given her the truth. She looked from me to Lena, at my hand, which had found its way to Lena's, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I see," she said, and I knew, in that moment, that Julian had lost. On the car ride home, the silence was different. It wasn't tense or awkward. It was comfortable, peaceful. When I pulled up in front of her apartment, I turned off the engine. The pretense was over. The curtain had fallen. I was supposed to return to my basement. The thought was unbearable. "Well," she said, her voice small. "Thank you, Eli, for everything. You don't have to, anymore." I looked at her. Her face was illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. "I don't want to stop," I said. "What? This?" "It wasn't pretend for me tonight, Lena. Not for a while now. I don't want to go back to my quiet apartment. I don't want to go back to being a ghost. I like standing in the rain with you." A tear traced a path down her cheek. "But my life it's a mess. It's all about Daniel and his routines, and it's not a mess," I said, reaching out and gently wiping the tear away with my thumb. "It's a life, a real important life, and I want to be in it, if you'll let me." She leaned across the console and kissed me. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-style kiss. It was quiet. It was gentle. It was a confirmation, a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was still there. At 1 month, Daniel started calling me Eli. He would leave his bird drawings on the kitchen table for me, his silent way of saying hello. I learned the difference between a downy woodpecker and a hairy woodpecker by the length of the beak in his sketches. At 6 months, I moved my tools into her spare closet. It made no sense to keep them in my basement apartment when I was spending every night at her place, fixing her leaky faucet, hanging shelves for Daniel's art supplies, becoming a part of the quiet, steady rhythm of their home. At 1 year, we were looking for a small house with a yard. Daniel had started drawing pictures of birds at a bird feeder outside a window. It was his way of asking. We found out through Lena's aunt that Mrs. DeWitt had done her own investigation after the party. She discovered that Julian was deeply in debt, that he had been trying to get his hands on Daniel's trust fund to cover his losses. She quietly and ruthlessly cut him off, ensuring Lena's guardianship was solidified beyond any legal challenge. Lena was vindicated, not by a fight, but by the quiet power of a truth that had been allowed to come to light. One evening, we were sitting on the couch in our new living room. Daniel was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. It was a different kind of quiet from my basement. This quiet was alive. It was filled with the hum of a shared life. I took a small, worn box out of my pocket. "I don't have a fancy ring," I said, my voice feeling thick in my throat. "I don't come from a world of diamonds and estates." I opened the box. Inside was a simple, silver ring. It was worn smooth with age. "This was my father's," I said. "He wore it every day. It's not worth much, but it's steady, and it's quiet, and it's real." Lena looked at the ring, then at me, her eyes shining. "It's perfect," she whispered. I slid it onto her finger. It fit. I often think about that night in the diner. I walked in there a ghost, a man who had accepted his own invisibility. I thought I was agreeing to do a good deed, to be a shield for a woman in trouble. I thought I was the one doing the saving. I was wrong. The truth is, she saved me. Every time she told me about Daniel, she was fixing a wire in me that had come loose, the one that connects you to other people. Every time we invented a piece of our fake past, she was building a bridge for me to walk back into the land of the living. Every moment I watch her love her brother with that fierce, quiet tenacity, she was showing me what real strength looked like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was patient. It was steady. It was just showing up, day after day. She was the one who stood with me in the rain of my own making, the cold, lonely drizzle of a life I had walled off from the world. She walked into my silence and wasn't afraid of it. She saw the man who fixed things and realized he was broken, too. And she didn't try to force me open. She just stayed. She just was. There's a quiet competence to love, I've learned. It's not always about grand gestures and loud declarations. Sometimes it's about noticing someone is cold and finding them a fireplace. It's about learning the specific blue of a blue jay's wing. It's about building a life not out of drama, but out of the steady, everyday acts of showing up for each other. My father was right. You don't break a horse's spirit to earn its trust. You just stand with it in the rain. And if you're lucky, so incredibly lucky, you realize the rain wasn't the storm at all. It was the thing washing you clean, clearing the ground, and making it possible for something new and beautiful to finally grow.